everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today I am here to do my October wrap-up, or should I say my Victober wrap-up. I have been participating in Victober for the past month, and thus I have been reading only Victorian books, or Victorian-related books. I have had a really fantastic reading month. I've enjoyed everything that I've read, some more than others, and that has gotten me really excited to move forward into next reading month as well. The first book I read was Lady Audley's Secret by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. This is perhaps one of the sensation novels of the era, and I had heard some things about what happened, and honestly I thought that the back had spoiled it, as they told me some major buzzwords for crimes that happen. But nothing quite prepared me for the plot itself. It was still able to surprise me in a number of ways, and I still find myself thinking about it, especially the ending, in terms of a modern perspective, and how does what happens to Lady Audley at the end of it, what could that symbolize and what does that mean in a larger sense? But I really enjoyed it. It was really gripping. If you haven't heard of it before, it is the story of a young man whose uncle has lately remarried a governess who seems to have a very mysterious air about her. While he is traveling to visit his uncle and his new wife, he also meets a young man who has just come back from 10 or 12 years in Australia, who had abandoned his wife to go to Australia and is determined that he is going to come back and find her and set things right. These two pieces of Robert Audley's life become intertwined in a very unexpected way. As I said, it gets very dark, very gripping. It's incredibly funny in places though, which I did not expect. And I really enjoyed it. So I'm looking forward to reading more sensation fiction and more from Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Next, I read two books that I do not have physical copies of. The first is Gothic Tales by Elizabeth Gaskell. This was our group read for this year. And it is just what it sounds like, a collection of Gothic short stories that Elizabeth Gaskell wrote and have been compiled over the years. Like any short story collection, I enjoyed some of these stories more than others. I think Lois the Witch was probably my favorite, and Disappearances, I would have to say, was my least favorite. But I was glad to have read more Elizabeth Gaskell. I can't tell you much about either of those short stories because they are so short. Even if I tell you a little bit of what happens, that does give away a lot of the plot. But I would definitely encourage you to check them out, and if you also read them this month, let me know which one was your favorite. I'd be curious to see. I also listened to Stephen Fry's Victorian Secrets through Audible, which I have had for years and never actually listened to before, and I'm very glad I did. It almost sounded as though there was a companion television program to go with it, but I haven't heard of such a thing. If you live in the UK, let me know. But I still very much enjoyed the radio production nonetheless. This is Stephen Fry talking to a wide variety of Victorian experts about a number of different areas of Victorian life that people usually don't like to talk about. He had a whole episode on public health, 2 episodes dedicated to same-sex relationships, one for male same-sex relationships and one for female. There were episodes about death, about how madness was treated at the time and other mental health issues, and each one of them was absolutely fascinating. I loved it so much, and I wish there were more. So if he does any more for any other historical eras, I will definitely be listening. Next, I picked up Moby Junction, which is primarily by Charles Dickens, but it is a collection of short stories on which he collaborated with Charles Collins, Amelia Edwards, Andrew Halliday, and Hesba Stretton. This is a collection of stories about Moby Junction, which is a fictional railroad junction. So many different train lines meet in this town, presumably called Moby. And this man arrives there one day after a very circuitous set of events, sets out trying to decide which of these railroad lines he should follow. Each subsequent short story tells the story of one character that he meets in each of those areas. The concept itself was really, really fascinating. Some of those individual short stories on each line were really good. They turned out to be ghost stories, which I did not expect. But the opening really put me off. It felt very vague, very circuitous, such that I had to read the back again and say, oh, that's what he's trying to set up. So overall, it's not my favorite Dickens that I have read so far, but I'm very glad that I did read it. Next, I read The Warden by Anthony Trollope. This is the first in his Barsetshire Chronicles series. I had tried to start with Barchester Towers years ago before I was on BookTube, and I didn't really get on with it. I wasn't at a place in my life where I could really appreciate it. But I am so glad that I picked this up. It's truly one of those novels where nothing happens, and yet everything happens. His character development is so incredible. You have the clearest view of who each of these people are, and you really begin to feel for them, whether or not you actually agree with them. And it is the story of Mr. Harding, who is the warden of an almshouse in a town in Barsetshire. And an almshouse was somewhere where impoverished people could go, or people who had become disabled through work could go and be supported by the church. So it was almost a predecessor to a welfare system. And so Mr. Harding looks after the almshouse and how it is run, and also whoever happens to be living there. And he has been doing this for years, and everyone respects him for it. However, there are various religious reformers who look at his salary and those of church figures around him and feel that they are earning far too much, and that the men living in the almshouse are entitled to much more money than they are currently receiving. And thus begins the most incredible, I'm going to use the phrase storm in a teapot, not in the sense of it's not important, but in the sense of it is furious and tempestuous, but it is contained in this tiny little area. And yet it has such great import and such great effect on everyone in this area. There is also the romantic plot of how the reformer who starts this movement is in love with Mr. Harding's younger daughter, but his older daughter is married to the archdeacon. A great deal of conflict ensues. So it's safe to say that I really, really enjoyed this one, and I cannot wait to continue with the Barsetshire series in the future. And lastly, today I finished Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy. I had heard so much about this book before I went into it that I thought I wasn't going to love it as much as I do, because it is, I think, possibly the last novel that Hardy wrote. And it was his most controversial, and it is generally considered to be his most depressing. Hardy is not really known for being a cheerful writer at the best of times, but this was his most depressing, was what I had heard. But I had also heard that it was absolutely beautiful. So I set out to see for myself. And it is It is indeed the story of Jude, who is a very poor young man. We meet him when he is a small boy, and then we watch him grow up from there, and how the seed is planted that he should go to Christminster, which for Hardy stands in for a university town like Oxford or Cambridge, and get a degree and thus make something of himself and make something better of himself. And so he sets out to do exactly that. But along the way, he is met with constant obstacles from society. And this continues into anything else that he tries to do, including his romantic relationships. And this hardens him and inures him to the fact that he should further and further break with society anyway, because these rules are stupid, it's not getting me anywhere. And it feels extremely modern, and yet it is timeless. And I think that's the bit that hit me most. And so thus, it wasn't as depressing as I expected, because you could see this still happening today in certain ways. So you could completely understand both sides. So it wasn't unexpected. There is something that happens in, I would say, the last sixth of this book that did take me by surprise, and it's absolutely heartbreaking and horrendous. And so I can see where this would be considered his absolutely most depressing. But for all that, it was really beautiful. I didn't like reading it because so many terrible things kept happening to Jude and the people around him, but I loved reading it, and it was completely capturing and engaging, sometimes whether I wanted it to be or not. I am definitely looking forward to reading some lighter and more cheerful books afterwards, but I am still very, very glad that I read it. So there you have it. Those are all the books I read for Victober this year. I am very excited for next year, but I could also see myself sneaking in some other Victorian goodies throughout the coming year. If you also participated in Victober, let me know what you read, if you have any favorites from this year, or if you have any recommendations for where I should go after this reading spree, as it were. Until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye, everyone.